Hi, welcome to Museum Moments. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee, and I am excited to be with you guys today. Um, it's a big day in Milwaukee. It's a big sporting day in Milwaukee. It's an historic day in Milwaukee. And when we were planning our schedule for this week, we really started looking at a different sporting event. We didn't think about the Bucks, or at least I think we didn't hold our breath. And we had done a series on the Bucks last year, so I posted one of those earlier today. We watched that, so you can watch that. We've got the history of the Bucks, and we are so excited to see this kind of pinnacle of athletic accomplishment happening in our fair city this very evening. But this week marks a big time for sports, and it's a time that many of us have been waiting for. If you're someone who loves the Olympics, you've been waiting for about 11 months for this to happen, maybe since the beginning of COVID. And when it started looking like the Olympics in 2020 weren't going to happen, suddenly you start thinking, when am I going to get my Olympics fix? When can I see synchronized swimming and shot put and the steeplechase, whatever that is for you. And the Olympics have this incredible history. They've been going on since 1896 with limited interruptions. But what we want to look at today is the Olympics. In this next 3-week period, we're going to be exploring the 1936 Olympics in particular. And we're going to be exploring the lead up to those Olympics, the kind of pomp and circumstance of those Olympics, and the propaganda that became part of kind of the Nazi storytelling, and how that actually became infused with the Olympic traditions themselves. So that's next week. And then week 3, we're going to explore some of the stories of athletes who participated in the 1936 Olympics. In this particular moment, we have seen so much controversy around these Olympics. Are there going to be fans? Are there not going to be fans? Who can participate? What is a regulated substance? All of these things have been going on. And what I want to show you today is this idea of controversy around the Olympics is nothing new. And the sense of what they symbolize versus the kind of way that the Olympics play out, also something not new in the universe. So let's jump into the Berlin Olympics, part 1, the lead up to it. I'm going to turn over to my screen here. So the Berlin Olympics. First, let's get a kind of general timeline as we're looking at this. Berlin is awarded the games, and they're awarded the games in 1932. Now, I'm going to take us back in time a little bit, and we're going to talk about some of the characters that are going to come up in this. The first thing that you need to know is that the Olympics, of course, were on hiatus during World War I. And from 1920 and 1924, those are the immediate Olympics after World War I, Germany was not allowed to participate because of their actions during World War I. So the first Olympic Games that Germany is back in is 1928. And in 1930, Germany is working to secure, and this is when it's still the Weimar Republic, they're working to secure the votes needed to have the 1936 Games. So they're starting that process of whining and dining. At this point, the games are quite new. You don't have this very formal, long-standing process that you see today with, huge amounts of investment and all of those pieces. But this is kind of the beginning of that process. And the committee that awards the Olympics in 1932 to Berlin really sees it as a way of pushing their support for a democratic Germany. There already are these anti-democratic forces that are making themselves known. And there's this sense that, well, we're going to give you the Olympics as this way of saying, look, we're shoring up your democracy through the idea of international competition, because we're saying you can be on the main stage, as a democracy, as an active member. Less than 6 months later, Hitler and the Nazi Party come into power in Germany. And initially, Hitler does not have any desire to be part of the Olympics. The things that it symbolizes in terms of, internationalism and competition between people of all backgrounds does not interest him, and in fact is anti his platform. And so his first sense is, no, we don't want to host the Olympics. And then very early on, he's convinced by Goebbels and others in his regime that the Olympics will benefit the Nazi cause, that we, the Nazis, can make this a propaganda success for the Nazi Party, and we should go ahead with it. And we'll talk a little bit more about the ways in which they do that next week. So two of the people who are most instrumental in getting the Olympics in Germany are these two gentlemen, Dr. Karl Diem and Dr. Theodor Leuwald. Both of them have interesting connections to Jewish personages. Dr. Leuwald had been involved in the Olympics for many, many years and had been really pushing the idea of having a Berlin Olympics. His paternal grandmother, so his dad's mom, was Jewish, making his dad, by Jewish definitions at the time, Jewish, but he had actually grown up Christian with no Jewish identity. And yet under these kinds of Nazi definitions of what it means to be Jewish, his background is questionable. Karl Diem is not Jewish, but his wife has that same kind of questioned background, as do some of his business associates. And so both of them, after the Nazis come into power, are put into questions. Diem refutes this and maintains his connections. Leuwald is able to do this to maintain his connections to the games, but loses his position of authority, and it is given to a member of the Nazi Party. Although they kind of make some caveats for him to maintain his involvement. The thing that continues to be a sticking point throughout the process of preparing for the games is the statement that Jews lose their citizenship with the Nuremberg laws. And there are all of these anti-Jewish laws that are in play. But really this idea that Jews aren't citizens and therefore can't be part of the games is this question that is called in by many, many international audiences, many people in the international sporting community, to say, should we be participating in games in which they are limiting who's a citizen in the country? So the IOC takes this very kind of tepid approach. And I will say the head of the IOC, was a Frenchman at the time, is actually anti-Semitic and says, this is, I don't really care for the Jews, but we need to make sure we're pushing for this to ensure that, we can have some way of saying that, that we're part of an international, peaceful, non-racist, non-anti-Semitic sort of event, that we need to do the most that we can to make sure that that's happening. And so what they do is that they ask the German Olympic Committee to sign a statement that says, as a principle, German Jews shall not be excluded from German teams at the games of the 11th Olympiad. So this becomes this kind of statement to say, hey, don't worry, we'll include Jews. And potentially, this is a way of saying to the international audience that, yep, Jews are involved too. And I see, Tommy, that the only living thing faster than Jesse Owens is his dog, Hawkeye. Potentially, maybe, who knows? We'll talk about Jesse Owens a little bit in a couple weeks. So the German Olympic Committee is saying everybody can be involved. But what I will say is that they very quickly brush up against this and find ways of excluding their Jewish people from their sporting groups. And this keeps coming back up about who is going to be allowed to participate both in the Winter Games, which also were in Germany, and this time they were in Bavaria, and in the Summer Games. There is backlash in America in a number of different places. One is the head of the AAU, and we're going to talk about the people who are pro-Olympics in a bit. But prior to Jeremiah Mahoney taking over the AAU, the guy who was in charge was a guy named Avery Brundage. We're going to come back to him. But Jeremiah T. Mahoney is a good Catholic fellow, and actually many of the people who are anti-engagement in the Olympics were Catholics, because they saw anti-Nazi, anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish response in Germany happening, maybe not with the same voice, but they saw them both in there. And the Catholics and Jewish principals are really pushing against this and saying, we can't send our amateur athletes into this kind of competition. And there are all of these forces at play. It reaches Congress. And in fact, two Jewish representatives, Emanuel Seller from New York and Representative Dickstein, also from New York, are saying in Congress, Germany will only permit true Nazis to represent her at the Olympic Games, and that tends to make the whole thing a silly joke. And then they also go on Dickstein says athletic officials who have been charged with choosing athletes to represent this country in the forthcoming Olympic Games in Germany should immediately withdraw all American participants unless the German government openly and without equivocation states that racial ancestry and religious beliefs will not be questioned. And so they were not okay with the kind of tepid response of the IOC. They wanted something more forthright. They wanted a bigger statement, something that really addressed this. There were a couple of senators who picked it up as well, but nothing actually happens in Congress. Surprise, surprise. And this then goes back to the Olympic Committee, the American Olympic Committee, and the AAU to fight it out. And the American Olympic Committee is led by this gentleman, Avery Brundage, who, if you're a fan of the Olympics, is a name that comes up again and again and again. He was the head of the International Olympic Committee from the 1950s to the 1970s. And you know, is really kind of seen as this grand figure in the world of amateur athletics. He pushes hard on this idea of amateur athletics. I think he would be horrified by the fact that we have that everyone basically in the Olympics at this point is a professional. And he had his own kind of anti-Semitic leanings to begin with, but really felt the most important thing was having a games. There was no point in his thinking that the game should be canceled. In 1934, he is taken to Germany and is a guest of the Nazi Party there to see, and he comes back with all of these reassurances about how it's going to be just fine. Jews are treated just great in Germany, and at no point he is given very much a sterilized propaganda tour of Germany. He's not allowed to meet with Jewish athletes by themselves. He's not allowed to talk to any Jewish interests in Germany while he's there, and he just takes the party line and then works on selling it in America, and really sells this, that the boycott efforts are totally led by Jews, and in fact later says, as the Olympics are about to happen, he says this actually could aid in our fundraising because we can really push people who are anti-Semitic to say, hey, you should give to these Olympics because look at what the Jews were trying to shut down. And in fact, does this similar thing where he mails letters to Jewish leaders and says, if you want to make it look like you are patriotic, you should be giving to this Olympics so that it doesn't look like the Jews are anti this Olympics. You know, that he's really taking this strange stance to say the most important thing is having an Olympics. It's not about what it says about participation in these Olympics in terms of, are we sending a message to the world that the Nazi regime is okay? So Avery Brundage is very pro the Olympics. He's pushing it. He's pushing it. He's pushing it. He, on his side on the Olympic Committee as well, is a guy named Charles Sherrill. And Charles Sherrill had been the ambassador to Turkey. He's a former general. And he basically goes to Germany and comes back and says, Jews, if you don't participate in this Olympics, this could lead to a wave of anti-Semitic violence in America. That this would be your fault for that to happen. He says there's a grave danger of anti-Semitic wave in the United States due to the agitation of Jews on behalf of their German brethren. So the Jews would be at fault if there was anti-Semitic attacks. I would not be surprised if it reached such proportions as it did in Spain in 1492 when the Jews were expelled from there. And then basically in this same speech, he says, yeah, you know, some of my best friends are Jewish. So I can't be anti-Semitic because some of my best friends are Jewish. But Sherrill and Brundage are really pushing for this. There's a third member of the American Olympic Committee, Jonke, who says we should not be in Germany. This is not a good look for us. But he is really overshadowed by these two fellows. So in December of 1935, this is put to a vote. And the thing here that becomes kind of complicated is that the vote is from the Amateur Athletic Union, the AAU. They're the people who are going to say, yes, we can send athletes. The American Olympic Committee are the people who are doing all of the organizing about, where trials and stuff are going place. But the actual organization that is managing the athletes themselves is the AAU. And they put this to a vote, and there are 33 different districts represented. And when it's just the people who are generally involved in the AAU, the normal, usual suspects, the boycott wins. They say we should not be there. But there are all of these additional people who are there at this particular AAU meeting because of the Olympics that edge the vote and defeat the boycott. So, and it's a very slim margin. It's like 58-54. And so the AAU says, yeah, I guess American athletes will be there. And there's a real sense that if the US had chosen to boycott this Olympics, that Canada and France and potentially England would have also chosen to boycott the Olympics. Instead, there's this sense that, well, if we have to go and be at the Berlin Olympics, we're going to fight that sense of supremacy and Aryanism on the field of sport, and we'll see how it goes in that battle. So that's what we're going to look at next time, is all of the pieces that lead into the actual games themselves. Thank you so much for joining me for this museum moment. And let's consider what would have happened potentially without the propaganda victory that we'll explore in our next session. Thanks to my fabulous intern, Emma Gasinski-Rose, for putting together much of this for me and getting it into kind of a compiled bite-sized piece. And thanks, as always, to our supporter, Robin Cohen. If you've enjoyed this or any other Jewish Museum moments, please feel free to make a donation at our website, jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. You also can come in and visit for real. So check out our current exhibit about this same time period, the WPA, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? Jewish Artists of the WPA. Have a great day, and we look forward to seeing you next week for this museum moment.